Hi guys, welcome to Peace and Carmen. I'm Carmen. And you might see my cat here trying to get her love and attention. She always tries to make an appearance in all of my videos. Today I wanted to discuss, don't nuzzle that. Talking to my cat, she's trying to nuzzle the computer and it's going to make the camera go crazy. So today I wanted to discuss the different kinds of grief. I had recently met up with somebody who is experiencing grief right now, but hers was very different than mine, and it really got me curious as to what kind of griefs are out there. How do people express their grief? And yeah, so I decided to do a little research and I wanted to share with you what I found. So we're going to go through all the different kinds that I found. If you know any more, please let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, we'll just jump right in. All right, so there is something called anticipatory grief. So this is a grief that occurs before the person has actually passed away. So for family of someone who received a diagnosis and their health starts to deteriorate, these feelings of loss can arrive. And it can be extremely difficult for people to handle that because the person is still living, but they're trying to accept the fact that what you thought life was going to be like, or what you thought things were going to, all the things that you thought was going to happen with this person is just not going to happen anymore, and that brings significant emotions. So that is the first one. The second one is normal grief. So despite the name, there is no type of normal grief, okay? So I just want to make sure that is very clear. But the term normal grief just is kind of an umbrella term for what you would assume grief to look like. So you would assume that it would be kind of intense emotions right away, and then it'll slowly start to move towards acceptance of that loss, and the emotions will slowly start to gradually decrease. But there are no normal definitions of grief, and there is no normal timeline or a normal severity of how you experience grief. Okay? So I just want to make sure that is very, very clear. So there's also a thing called delayed grief. So delayed grief occurs when immediately those feelings of grief don't arise in you just yet, but it happens, it's postponed until later. So the onset of that grief reaction can be something that occurred because of another major life event of some sort. That might actually seem unrelated, but in reality, it brought all of these other emotions up for you. So that can be the reactions from this unrelated event can be extremely excessive for what that current situation actually was, but it's the grief that's arriving because of this other event. So the next type of grief that we'll discuss is complicated grief. It can also be called traumatic or prolonged grief. So this type of grief occurs when the grief is significantly too long, okay? So of course there is no normal standard of how long you need to be grieving, how long is normal for grieving, but when there are warning signs. So if the person died suddenly, was it violent? Was it multiple deaths? What was the relationship to this person who had passed? These are warning signs that someone might be experiencing this traumatic grief, okay? You might be seeing signs of self-destructive behavior, deep and persistent feelings of guilt, low self-esteem, suicidal thoughts, violent outbursts, and radical lifestyle changes. So this is just something to look out for, especially if you are trying to take care of someone who is experiencing grief right now. And these are things that you might see. So there is also disenfranchised grief or ambiguous grief. So this is felt when someone experiences loss, but others don't acknowledge the importance of that loss. So that happens from like an ex-spouse, or even when you lose an animal, a pet, and people just don't want to really acknowledge the fact that you have validity being grieving, that you can grieve, that you also have a right to feel these emotions, but it feels like you're a little bit alone because people don't understand the importance of the loss for you. So that one can be extremely challenging, and my heart goes out to anybody who is going through that, because your grieving is important, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if other people can't see that. Okay, so, but it is good to be able to have the support of somebody who can understand what you're going through. So, I feel for you on that. I definitely do. If this is something that you've gone through, or you know someone who's gone through, I definitely feel for you on that. This can also happen if a person has, if your loved one is experiencing things like dementia, or you just start seeing a decline in their physical abilities, that can also be categorized under this type of grief, even with this person still alive. There's also chronic grief. So this can be experienced through feelings of hopelessness, a sense of disbelief that the loss actually happened, that it's real. It can show up in avoidance of any situation that reminds them of that person. And it can, people who are going through this can experience intrusive thoughts. If left untreated, the chronic grief can develop into severe clinical depression, suicidal or self-harming thoughts, and even substance abuse. So definitely something to look at. There's also cumulative grief. So this happens when there's multiple losses for that person, especially within a short time period. So it's when someone doesn't have time to grieve properly over the first loss, and then another one occurs. There's also masked grief. That is in the form of physical symptoms or other negative behaviors that start to occur that the person is unable to recognize that these symptoms and behaviors are occurring because of the grief. There is distorted grief. So this happens when feelings of extreme guilt and anger, noticeable changes in behavior, hostility towards a particular person, and other self-destructive behaviors begin to present itself, where it's just extremely excessive. There's also exaggerated grief. So that is felt through the intensification of normal grief responses. So this is, you'll have your normal grief responses, but this is just even more intense, and it has a tendency to worsen as time moves on, instead of gradually moving towards acceptance and slowly allowing that grieving process to slow down. This process will start speeding up through exaggerated grief. This can also result in self-destructive behavior, suicidal thoughts, drug abuse, abnormal fears, nightmares, and it can even bring the emergence of underlying psychiatric disorders as well. So there's also inhibited grief. So this is when someone doesn't outwardly show any typical signs of grief. This is typically done consciously to keep their grief private, but problems can occur when we do that because we are not letting those emotions out. We're not letting ourselves process this, and that can present itself with physical manifestations, and that can be extremely troubling. Excuse me. So there's also secondary losses in grief. So secondary losses is felt after the primary loss and can affect multiple areas of a person's life. So the grief from secondary losses is an emotional response to the first loss that occurs as a result, of that first loss. There's also collective grief. So that happens within like a community. That's when a city or a country are feeling the shock of, a natural disaster, death of a public figure, things like that. So that's where a large amount of people are experiencing this devastating reactions to a devastating situation. So the next type of grief is abbreviated grief. So this is a short-lived response to loss. This can happen when something else just immediately fills that void, or the distance that was felt, or the experience of the anticipatory grief. So this is just a shorter type of grief. There's also absent grief. Absent grief occurs when someone doesn't acknowledge the loss or shows any signs of grief whatsoever. This can be just a result of complete shock. It can be denial to death. It can be concerning if someone experiencing absent grief, if someone starts to experience this for a long time. So I just want to reiterate that there is no normal type of grieving. Everyone grieves in their own way. And that even if you can't necessarily see the specific signs of grieving, that grieving still might be happening. It's just, I guess, a friendly reminder to keep compassion at the front of all your actions. You never know what someone's battling. And it's good to stay kind, stay supportive, and try to help people find their life again, from probably a really tough situation. So, thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. I appreciate it all. We got to over 100 subscribers. I'm so excited. We're definitely going to do some more videos on grief, but there's plenty of other things to come. I'm planning on doing a lot of herbal education videos. Lots of my favorite herbs will go on to that. We're going to do a lot more little spell works. Those are fun. And definitely more tarot readings. So the end of the month is coming up. We're going to have your September tarot readings coming up. And if you want to see anything else, anything more, please let me know in the comments below. I'm all about the recommendations, okay? All right. Good luck. I love you all. You have my support, you have my strength, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.